First things first, this is a topic that me and a colleague of mine, Andrew Kraut, started a while ago.
Because you're not using a handheld,
Okay.
we're going to have to put this onto you.
Okay, great. I guess I can do it here.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a topic that a colleague of mine, Andrew Kraut, and me started a while ago. This was literally just a coincidence. We were both working separately on this one while we were configuring a honeypot. And yes, we then merged our research together and then we ended up with this. Yeah. Again, this is us. In case you didn't notice, I'm the one in the right, in case you haven't noticed yet. So, a summary. Today we'll be talking about what the quarantine policy is. I'm not going to say the full name of it. It's a mouthful. Then we will look at what privileges it contains, how we can bypass it, and then how we can bypass it with style. So, hypothetically speaking, let's presume that a dev pushes a code, and why the hell is this way? Nah, this was supposed to have something else here, but anyway. So, this was supposed to have a blue screen of dev there, sorry. So, let's say that a dev pushes a code, a senior as always reviews it, and then blue screen of death. That's another company. I'm just joking. But let's presume that they push a code and then you get one of these two emails. The one that says, oh yeah, a policy has been attached to your user, and another one that says, oh yeah, your account is now locked. And you're like, this is usually what happens next for the next 2 weeks. But after that, you are like, okay, wait, my user is leaked, as the email says. And it has this policy. What the hell is that policy? And you look at it and you realize that policy is a policy that is attached to an identity whenever it is leaked to avoid other compromises to your own AWS account. And you look at the policy and you can see its service is there, a lot of stuff being cancelled. Okay, yeah, I'm safe, right? And but how? How am I safe? So in AWS, in case you don't know, you have policies which manage privileges. Each of the privileges is a split of the service and what you can do with it. In AWS, deny is always prioritized before allow, meaning if you have two policies attached, one which allows 4 privileges and one which denies 3 of them, only one of them will be allowed. Okay? Now, by this point, you have realized that this one will play the role of the quarantine policy and this one will play the role of basically all the policies that the user has attached to them. And that green part is what we will be working with. Just to just to explain this, because many people get confused on this one, we are not saying, so this policy does not allow anything. This policy just does not prevent some stuff. Meaning, if you are allowed to do them, you will be allowed to do them by another policy which is allowing you. The policy is just not preventing you from doing a bad thing on the environment. Now, how much of a security policy can a quarantine policy be considered as? Not so much, but to their credit, they do not call the quarantine policy a security feature. They just call it as a small protection against. They call it against financial fraud, which might happen from leaked credentials. The thing is, many people think of this, especially when they see the email, as sort of, okay, we are safe because it's preventing a lot of stuff from being done. It's not. Now, let's check again the quarantine policy. We have, as I said, 8 services, out of which we have 5 privileges which are read related. No other read related. The other ones are write ones. Meaning, everything else except those 5 is allowed. So any enumeration, if you have a set of leaked credentials and you want to enumerate, unless it's those 5 credentials, you can continue to try any enumeration method. If the user is allowed to do it, he is allowed to do it, not prevented by the policy. which means you will be having stuff like enumeration using policy simulation, something that I don't see many people talk about. If I'm not wrong, Scout Suit, if I'm not wrong, started this first. And this is a way to check if an identity is allowed to execute a certain privilege by just gathering all the policies that they are allowed and all the policies that that they have attached and all the policies that their group has attached, and then just say, okay, am I allowed to do IAM read user? So IAM list user. Sorry, it will show you allowed or not. This is not prevented, meaning if an identity has this allowed and if they have other privileges which allow you to list their policies, you will be able to know what the identity can or cannot do. Or other more important stuff. You can download a function or you can download environment variables from that function, which may contain important information. Again, not prevented by the quarantine policy, or even worse, you can even download secrets from the secrets manager. As you can see there, it says the best city in Balkans, Jakova. Secrets are not always true. Let's put it this way. But yeah, on 2018, so after we've gone with the enumeration part, we want to know if an identity can escalate their privileges, if we are able to get more privileges on it. On 2018 or 19, RhinoSec released a list of, back then if I'm not wrong, there were 21 or 23 privilege escalation methods, which right now are 28. We found out that 8 of them are partially allowed, 4 of them are fully allowed, and 4 of them are partially allowed. And the reason why they are not allowed to be done is because we are not allowed to either modify or add a policy to an identity or just modify the role of the service. But if we take that out of the equation, so if we just abuse the privileges that currently a certain service role has, we are allowed to get access and potentially escalate our privileges by the privileges that the service has on their role. And yeah, the first one we saw, this one was actually the most the one that I liked the most, because a glue environment will have some endpoints, and the endpoints will have an instance profile, a role, basically attached to a server. The role will have privileges. By default, they have 3 policies attached. And if the user wants, they can also attach another one, which is Amazon S3 full access, which is helpful because, one, S3 list all my bucket and EC2 run instances are privileges that the quarantine policy prevents from being executed. But now, since you are using the role of the glue environment, you are completely out of the scope of the quarantine policy, meaning you can again do both of them, and then you can continue to do what you were not prevented from doing. But with this one, you are certain, even with the default settings, that you will get at least 2 privileges which the quarantine policy does not prevent you from doing, meaning you are literally just bypassing the quarantine policy with this, and a threat actor will want to look at both of them because they can set up crypto mining, which we've seen them a lot do with the run instances, and they can just list all the buckets, which can give them a list of the buckets, and then they can continue, if possible, to get access to their content. Secondly, this is actually something that I was kind of, estranged by, because assuming roles usually roles usually contain some privileges, and assuming roles shouldn't be allowed by an identity that has a leaked credential, because if they have access to assume a role, they can get access to the credentials of that role, again being able to bypass the quarantine policy, because right now they are working within the scope of the role, not the user with the leaked credentials. And all of them, assume role with ASML and web identity, are not prevented. So, everything that is assume role wildcard will be allowed. The only thing that is not allowed here is you are not allowed to update the policy the trust policy of a role, meaning you will not be able to give yourself access. Even if the user has access to do that, the quarantine policy will prevent it, but you are not prevented from assuming a role. Same way, you are not prevented, for the Lambda. Lambdas are cloud code which is executed at a certain using a certain trigger. It can be a manual trigger, it can be a trigger based on a certain event. Being a code, they need libraries, right? You import libraries to execute a certain code. That library in Lambda is called a layer, and is basically that you just import a certain library and you put it there in this locally in cloud, whatever the hell that means. But that means that you can, as an attacker, modify that. And if you are able to modify the layer of this function, you are able to execute a code. Now, this doesn't look so good, sorry about that one, but in this case, we have updated the layer of a certain function, which gave us the credentials which are on the environment variable of the Lambda. Now, if you are able to update the certain library and then put it back there, you can inject the code and you can have a good persistence method which will give you code each time the function is invoked. Meaning each time the function is invoked, you get a new set of credentials, meaning you will get always credentials from the Lambda. Again, something not prevented by the quarantine policy. So this is just CodeStar as a service was deprecated in August 2024, but for projects that were pre-August 2024, you are also allowed to add the team member, again getting the privileges of the CodeStar. And I'm not going to touch upon much. Again, you can just create a pre-signed URL for SageMaker, giving you access to their instance and again their role, again getting the privileges of the role. And this is the privilege escalation or the potential privilege escalation that you can make. Now, depending on the privileges that the role will have, you will be getting, there might be cases when you might get administrative access, especially in cases when a programmer or something just gave it to the role. Aside from them, you have stuff that we've seen are not privilege escalation, but still can impact an infrastructure. So you can execute a command on an instance using SSM. SSM is, the best way I can explain is a wrapper around SSH, which allows you to use send command, which is another way of saying ssh.c for a send command, or start session, which gives you an interactive sort of SSH session to the instance. And both of them will execute that with sudo access, meaning you get root access inside the instance. Now, this one is actually a nice way that you can get access to the management console. We have seen at least two threat actors that Permiso has found out now, GUI-Evil and Looker3 or ScatterSpider, which use management console a lot, so they use GUI tools a lot. Now, if you are one of those people that do not like to get to just code their work on it, you will need to either create a login profile, which will allow you to get access there. You basically create a password for your user, or you can update that, which means you update the password for the user. Or you can do this one. You can get a federated token, which basically gives you a set of temporary credentials for your IAM user. Then, using some curl magic and some alcohol, you will be able to get an authorized token. But yeah, jokes aside, this is actually a documented feature from AWS. You can just send those credentials, those federated credentials, to the sign-in endpoint, and they will authorize a URL for you, and you can just paste it, and your user doesn't even need to have a login profile for this. You don't have to do anything with the login profile. You will get access to the management console with the privileges you have. So you can just go ahead, do this, and get a direct access to that. Then we have object access. So you can just download or upload objects. So put, upload, get, download, easy as that. You cannot delete objects. You cannot delete objects, but as I said, you can upload and download them. And you can also put, hopefully I put, yes, you can also put the encryption configuration of on a bucket, which again, why is this important? Because you can ransomware with both of them. Now, a bucket can be encrypted using KMS, right? KMS is a cross-account resource, meaning you can have your own attacker account, you can have your own attacker KMS key, you can put the configuration, bucket configuration to encrypt the bucket with your attacker key, then you can just download and upload back the object with the encrypted with the key. Right now, the target doesn't have access to the key. You do, meaning you can just say, you know, just give me money or I will not give you access to that. And the way AWS KMS keys work is that you don't even download the file. You literally lose access of the file. It's basically you just set up an ACL over the file. And it's very nice. You know, we actually did even a presentation on this topic, and RhinoSec did one in 2020 or 2019 about the same the same topic. Lastly, if the bucket you know, happens to have versioning on them, you can again tamper with the versioning. You cannot do delete object. You cannot do delete object, which will delete previous versions of the object, but you can just tamper with the versioning. Just go ahead, disable versioning, encrypt, and then, you know, hope that they don't have much important versions, you know, back then. And again, this works well with the ransomware, because right now you are stopping them from having a current version of the file that they had. And as far as the KMS, since we're working on that one too, you can do the same thing with a local KMS key. You can just tamper with the policy that the key has, and just say, okay, I want to get access to this key. And if you get access to that key, you will be able. So this is kind of a cat and mouse situation, because the key is inside the infrastructure, but still you can tamper with them on what the key has access to. One good thing of using this code, so the put key policy, is that some data are currently encrypted with KMS, meaning if you get access to the key, you can decrypt those data and then get access to the encrypted information. So again, something else that they do not prevent you. Lastly, so we know about the CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. Availability is the third part. That's what we can currently do. We can just shut down an instance. We can terminate an instance. We are allowed to do that. We are not prevented from doing that by the policy, which leads to another way, which can be sort of called the privilege escalation. Each instance has something called a user data, or can have something called a user data, which is a startup script, a code that will get executed when the server is started or restarted if you can modify it a bit. Now, the quarantine policy does not allow you to use start instance, which will start up the instance. But if you can phish the user, or if you can just, you know, scare them enough, you can shut down the instance, and then you can modify the instance attribute. And if they get scared enough, or if you can, you know, find a way to work with that, you can quite literally have them start, and then you will get code execution on the instance. Lastly, this is something that the P0 manager found. This is an actual case study of why quarantine policy should be regulated more. We found out as a company, and actually he did most of the work. He found out that threat actors were using leaked credentials to get access to Bedrock AI agents, and they were using them for their own. Well, basically, they had a role-play porn, you know, site, which were using literally AI agents from other people that, you know, from leaked credentials. And none of these ones here, which were used, were prevented by AWS. Some of them are currently prevented, but prior to that, none of them were prevented. And we found out a large infrastructure which literally had credentials just doing this one here, just doing all of this here. So we have a case study of this being actually malicious, of the quarantine policy not being well defined, having actual issues. We also have an empty page. Now, lastly, the one thing that we found, and is that as we said before, you get one of both emails, right? One says that the policy is attached, and another one that says it's not attached. Well, why is that? It's because AWS doesn't want to interfere with your infrastructure. So what they do is that they attach the policy using the leaked credentials privileges. Meaning, if the leaked credential doesn't have access to attach a policy on themselves, they will not be able to attach this policy, and the account, that's how it works. We even tested that. So and another thing that we found out, I don't know if they fix it now, but when we disclosed it, that's how it was. And another thing that we found out is that since each user has a number of policies they can be applied, by default is 10 per user and 20 per group. Even if you have 10 policies attached to your user, the 11th one will be this policy. So you will not have an issue with that. But detection-wise, one thing we found out is that when you get an attached user policy, the request will not have neither the request parameters nor the response elements field. So both of them will be null. And one way that you can detect if you have this case on your infrastructure, aside from looking at the emails that you usually put on the junk, is by literally just looking on CloudTrail for an IAM attached user policy of an identity on themselves with both of these parameters set to null, and you will be able to find an identity which most likely has a policy, a quarantine policy attached by AWS on themselves, which is a red flag. And just to close this up, always just the title is wrong. Sorry, the title should be what now? After all of this, what the takeaways should be from this one? The takeaway should be: check your leaked credentials, check your emails for leaked credentials, check your users which had at a certain point a leaked credential, and check the impact that the users has, because they might have a lot more than you might think they do. This is the list of privileges that you have to look for on your own infrastructure. These are the ones that are not prevented by AWS. So I would recommend, if you have a credential with, if you have a user with leaked credentials, just create one that prevents all of them. Yeah, this is the what now. And thank you. Sorry I took too much. Any questions or anything? Okay, no.